So here are the 11 organ systems that we're going to learn. As you can see, there's a lot of information on there. There's each system, it has a bunch of organs in each system. So I've got a free study guide that you can download, link in the description for that. You can print it out, you can take notes on it. It's going to have different practice activities that you can do, as well as practice exercises like questions that you can answer to test your understanding on all this stuff. It's free, check it out in the link in the description below. All right, let's go back to these. There are 11 organ systems, but what I like to do is kind of categorize them based on their function. So we're going to go through them in this order. First, we're going to look at systems that are dealing with support and movement, primarily the skeletal and the muscular and then the integumentary system. Then we're going to look at the systems that deal with integration and coordination, basically controlling all of the other systems. So that would include the nervous and endocrine. Then we'll look at two systems involved with transport, so moving substances around inside of the body. So that's going to be your cardiovascular system throughout your bloodstream, as well as the lymphatic system. That also includes the immune system in it as well. But those are going to be transporting water and other substances throughout the body. And then finally, we'll look at absorption and excretion. So this is going to be bringing things into the body and then removing things out of the body. So the digestive system and the respiratory system, those will be bringing things into the body when we breathe in or when we eat food or drink. And then we'll have all three of these systems really getting rid of stuff from the body, whether that's urine or carbon dioxide or our bowel movements, right? And then finally, we've got reproduction, and that's going to be, of course, to produce new offspring. And so those are going to be kind of the 5 groups or categories we're going to use for all of these different systems. So let's jump into our first system, which is the integumentary system. Obviously, the integumentary system involves your skin. So we've got the skin here, and this is going to be a cross section of the skin. If we remove a chunk, we zoom way in on it. This is what the skin's going to look like. We've got the hair, of course. We also have the fingernails. And so those are going to be the 3 main kind of organs that are part of the integumentary system. But the primary one is the skin. So let's jump in or zoom in on this piece of skin right here. We're going to take a look at 4 functions of the skin, and they form the acronym PTSD, which helps us to remember those different functions. The first one is protection, right? It's the outer layer of our body. It's going to prevent things from getting into our body that we don't want, such as bacteria and viruses that might be harmful to us. It also protects from things like UV radiation, so it's not damaging our internal organs and all of that. So protection is a big part of this. The second is temperature regulation. So it's going to help regulate the temperature in our bodies. Several ways that it'll do that. For one, we've got sweat glands right here that'll produce sweat, and when that sweat evaporates, that cools off our skin, cools off our body. You also see there's blood vessels going up into the skin, and so we can regulate the flow of blood. In other words, we can allow more blood to flow into the skin or less blood to flow into the skin to help regulate the temperature. Our skin also acts as an insulator, so we've got several layers of skin. It's just going to keep the warmth inside of our body. So temperature regulation is a big one. Hair will help with that as well. And then we've got sensation. So you can see there are nerve endings that come up into different parts of the skin. We've got these different sensory receptors. Those are all the stuff in yellow right there. And those are connected to nerves. And so sensation is a big part of our skin's function. Obviously, that's connected to the nervous system. And then finally, vitamin D synthesis. And so vitamin D is an important vitamin that we need to synthesize, but we don't do it throughout the rest of our body. We don't produce it except for in our skin, and we use the sunlight in order to do that. So anyway, those are the 4 functions of skin: protection, temperature regulation, sensation, and vitamin D synthesis in the integumentary system. So PTSD, to remember that. Quick thing, if you're feeling overwhelmed by your A&P class or exams, or just the sheer amount of information that you're supposed to learn in anatomy and physiology, you're not alone. That's actually really common. But here's the truth. The real game changer isn't spending more and more hours studying. It's not even watching more of my YouTube videos, but it's learning how to learn effectively. That's the skill that helps you to actually retain all of the information that you're learning and not just wasting time rereading notes and then forgetting all that stuff that you were supposed to learn. That's exactly how I created the A&P Memory Lab. It's a 5-week program where I teach you how memory actually works and how to make the anatomy and physiology content you're learning actually stick in your brain's long-term memory forever. You'll save hours of study time, feel way more confident going into your exams, and move closer to your goal of becoming a nurse, doctor, physical therapist, whatever your career goals are, all without the stress and burnout that often comes with studying A&P. If that sounds like what you need, check out the link in the description. I'd love to see you in the A&P Memory Lab and to help you achieve your goals. All right, back to the organ systems. Our next one is going to be the skeletal system. So the skeletal system, we're still in support and movement. And so the organs of the skeletal system, we'll start with those. The first is going to be the bones. That's the main one that you think of. Obviously, we've got the bones like the skull and the ribs and our humerus, for example. The next thing we're going to have is joints. And we've got 3 types of joints in the body. The first is going to be fibrous joints. These don't have any movement. Those would be between like the bones of the skull, for example. We've got another type of joint, which is going to be cartilaginous joints. And we can see cartilage here between the vertebrae and our spine. And so these are going to be a bunch of cartilaginous joints. They allow a little bit of movement because there's cartilage between them. And then finally, we have something called synovial joints. Those would be like the joints in your knee or your elbow or your wrist, where there's lots of movement. And so you can see an example here in the knee joint. And we have this fibrous connective tissue that's connecting the joint. That's going to be ligaments. Ligaments connect bone to other bone. And so we have those in the skeletal system. And then here we can see, if we remove that, we've got some cartilage right there that's going to reduce the friction between those bones whenever we have all that movement. But the big idea here is we've got ligaments that are going to hold the joints together, connect bone to bone. All right, what about the functions of the skeletal system? So several functions here. One is going to be structural support. So if we didn't have bones, we'd kind of just be a big blob without any structure. So that structural support is important. They're also levers for our muscles. Our muscles cause us to move. And so here we've got an example of the bicep muscle. And as we bend the arm, the bicep muscle is using the bones of the arm as levers for that movement. So here, let's contract that biceps muscle a little bit there, and we'll contract it again. And you can see it's pulling on the bone, causing that movement of those bones. So they act as levers for muscles. A third really important function is going to be protection. It's going to protect vital organs. One big example of that is the skull. Obviously, inside of our skull, we have the brain. And so the brain's very important. The brain's also very easy to damage. And so that's why we have this bone that covers it. Similarly, we have the ribs, which protect our heart and lungs. We also have the pelvis that'll protect our pelvic organs, our reproductive organs, and all of that. So protection is an important part of the skeletal system. And then next, another function is going to be producing blood cells. So your blood cells are actually produced in your bones. We've got bone marrow. We're going to have red bone marrow all throughout here. We can see that bone marrow here as well. And so the main function of the red bone marrow is to produce blood cells. That's red blood cells and white blood cells. It's produced in our bone. Pretty cool. And then finally, mineral storage. And so our bones are made up of calcium and phosphate as kind of the primary minerals. Calcium in particular is really important to regulate how much calcium we have in the blood. And so we'll take some calcium out of the bone or put it back into the bone to make sure the calcium levels in our blood are where they need to be. So we use bone to store minerals as well. That's the skeletal system. Bones and joints are the main kind of organs. And then we've got a lot of functions there. Structural support, levers for movement, protecting our vital organs, producing blood cells, and storing of minerals. Up next, we have the muscular system. The organs, pretty much the only organs, are the skeletal muscles. Of course, we've got a lot of different skeletal muscles that cause different movements and actions throughout the body, but skeletal muscles is the main one. Here's an example of a skeletal muscle. This is going to be your tricep muscle. And we also have tendons. Tendons are kind of like ligaments, but instead of connecting bone to bone, they're going to connect the muscle to a bone. And so here in our triceps muscle, it's going to connect right here to the scapula, right here to the humerus, right here to the ulna. And whenever it contracts, that's going to pull on those bones and cause this movement to occur. So the skeletal muscles and tendons are the main organs in our muscular system. Notice I didn't say the other two types of muscles, which are cardiac muscle. That'll be more the cardiovascular system. That's the muscle in our heart, as well as smooth muscle. We have that in our cardiovascular system around our blood vessels. We also have smooth muscle in our digestive tract to push food along. So really, when we're talking about the muscular system, we're mainly talking about skeletal muscles, the muscles that move our skeleton, move our bones. Now for the functions of the muscular system, of course, one of those is going to be movement. So we've got a person running right here. We've got a hamstring muscle right there that's going to be connected to the pelvis, as well as down here. And so whenever that contracts, that's going to cause a movement of that knee joint. So movement is a big part of the functions of the muscular system. That's not the only function though. Another one is going to be posture. So whenever you're sitting up straight or standing up straight, muscles are contracted and some are relaxed in order to help you maintain that posture. Another one is going to be heat production. Just think about a time where you felt cold. You might start to move around a little bit, and the reason that you're doing that is to produce some heat. And so we have heat production that's produced in our muscles. That's an important function, keeping us warm through movement. So that is the muscular system. We've got skeletal muscles and tendons, and we've got those three functions: movement, posture, and the production of heat or thermal energy. All right, up next we have the nervous system. We've also moved from those support and movement systems, and now we're moving into systems that are dealing with integration and coordination. In other words, these are going to be the systems that are controlling the other systems of the body. And so this will be the nervous system and the endocrine system. First, we'll start with the nervous system. The nervous system is going to include several organs. First of all, of course, is the brain. The brain is going to be the main control center of the body. It's going to be processing sensory information. It's going to be where your personality and all your thoughts are, but it also controls things that you don't think about, such as your breathing rate and your heart rate and homeostasis throughout the body. So a lot of stuff is going on in our brain. Extending down from the brain, of course, we've got the spinal cord. I personally have a spinal cord injury. I use a wheelchair, if you didn't know that, because of a spinal cord injury. So I really love the nervous system. It's a really fascinating one for me. So we've got the spinal cord there. And then branching out of the spinal cord, we have all of our nerves. Of course, we have cranial nerves coming from the brain as well. So the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. And we also have sensory receptors that are going to be at the end of a lot of those nerves, the sensory nerves at least. So those are going to be the main organs. We could also add sensory organs like our eyes, our ears, things like that. We could also add to our nervous system here. Now the functions, one is going to be fast communication and control. We're going to compare that in a minute to the endocrine system, which releases hormones, and that's going to be a slower control. But the nervous system is going to be for fast control. It sends really fast nerve impulses throughout the body. Think of every movement that you do, that signals are sending from your brain down your spinal cord to the muscles, and so that has to be very fast as you can respond to things. That's the speed at which your nervous system is working. It also deals with sensory processing. And so, for example, like if you feel touch or if you feel like a tickle in your armpit, that sort of a thing, your brain and your nervous system are processing that sensory information and thinking about what that means, right? Next, we have coordination of body functions. And so this would be things like breathing and heart rate, your digestive system. Your nervous system is really going to be controlling all of those different responses. Your stress, things like that, it's all controlled by the nervous system. Again, brain, spinal cord, nerves, and it's going to be fast communication and control and sensory processing. It's going to tell all the other systems what to do, including our next system, the endocrine system. So the endocrine system, like I said, is going to be like the nervous system in that it's controlling other systems, but it's going to control them more slowly rather than kind of quick, almost instant responses. So our function here is long-term communication and regulation using hormones. So this could be on the order of minutes to hours, even to days. And it's going to do that by releasing hormones into our bloodstream. Now, one thing you'll notice, look at all the organs of the endocrine system. We've got some in the brain, we've got some in here, some down here, but they're all disconnected from each other. The reason they're disconnected is they're all producing hormones which travel through the cardiovascular system. So I can overlay onto here our cardiovascular system, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and that's going to allow these hormones to travel throughout the body. And so these organs of the endocrine are not touching each other because they're going to use the cardiovascular system to communicate throughout the rest of the body. All right, so let's take a look at the organs involved here. And we're going to zoom in on the brain first. It's not the whole brain, but a few parts of the brain that are involved. The first ones are hypothalamus. This is often called the homeostatic control center of the brain. The hypothalamus is going to produce a few hormones. It's also got some nerve cells, which are going to send signals to this next organ right here, which is the pituitary gland. If you're studying this stuff for the first time, just think about the hypothalamus and pituitary gland as two small organs that can produce hormones that control other organs throughout the body. Pituitary gland is often called the master gland or the control gland of the rest of the body because it produces hormones that will travel throughout the body and tell other endocrine organs to produce their hormones to control some other specific function. So these two organs, hypothalamus, pituitary, are going to be controlling the other kind of glands and organs and stuff throughout the body. They produce a lot of hormones. We're not going to get into all of those in this video. We also have the pineal gland. It's kind of more on the posterior side of the brain right there. It's going to release melatonin, which regulates your sleep cycle, your circadian rhythm, your day-night cycle, which is pretty cool. So those are three organs in the brain that are part of the endocrine system. Next, let's zoom in right here. We've got an organ that's going to be kind of in your neck right there called the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is going to primarily regulate your metabolism. So it's going to speed up your metabolism or it might slow down your metabolism. Metabolism is just really the sum of all the chemical processes taking place in the body. And so we might speed up the chemical processes in our body in order to produce more ATP so that we can do more stuff more quickly, or we might slow that down depending on a couple of different things that might be going on in the body. But the idea here is that your thyroid gland is regulating your metabolism. Up next, on the other side of your thyroid gland, you have the parathyroid glands. The parathyroid glands are these four really small glands that we see right around in here, and those are going to help with regulating your calcium levels in the blood. So just think parathyroid, calcium. Your thyroid gland also is involved with that process as well. All right, up next we have the thymus gland. You'll see the thymus gland come up again in the lymphatic system. The thymus gland is going to help develop your immune system. It's going to release a hormone that's going to help develop T cells, which are a type of immune system cell, a white blood cell. But it's part of the endocrine system because it's using a hormone to do that. That's the thymus gland. It's kind of above your heart right there. Up next we have the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands, of course, will produce adrenaline, also one called noradrenaline. It's also called epinephrine and norepinephrine. But the adrenal glands are going to help you regulate your response to stress. It's a little more complex than that, but for now, just think about your adrenal glands being in control of your stress response. Underneath that, or inferior to that, we've got the pancreas. The pancreas releases two hormones, one called insulin, one called glucagon, and those are going to regulate the blood sugar levels in your body. So you might know someone who has diabetes who takes insulin. Insulin is just a hormone produced in the pancreas that tells different organs in their body, like your liver and your skeletal muscles, it tells it to take in blood sugar. In other words, take sugar out of the blood, store those in those other organs in order to reduce your blood sugar level. So that's going to be the pancreas, insulin, glucagon, but just know it regulates blood sugar. All right, we've got two more. These are also going to show up in the reproductive system. One is the ovaries. That'll release estrogen and progesterone, which are going to control the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle. It's also going to develop the secondary sexual characteristics. And then second, we have the testes. The testes will produce testosterone, which are going to help with sperm production and other secondary male sex characteristics. So those are part of the endocrine system as well as reproductive. Endocrine because they produce hormones. So a lot of organs. I went through a lot of information there. Of course, if you're learning this for the first time, at the beginning of an A&P course, let's say, you don't need to know all of the functions and all of those hormones. Once you study the endocrine system specifically, you'll learn those a lot more in depth. So it might be enough for you right now, depending on where you are with your study of A&P, that you may just need to know, hey, endocrine system is dealing with hormones, and maybe you can identify some of those particular organs. So those are our systems, nervous and endocrine, for integration and coordination. Up next, we're going to look at some systems dealing with transport. That's going to be the cardiovascular and lymphatic system. Let's take a look at the cardiovascular system. Its function here is going to be transporting lots of stuff throughout the body. Blood is the main thing that you'll think of, but what is blood? Blood is mostly water. It's a lot of nutrients. It's going to have red blood cells and white blood cells. Red blood cells are going to transport oxygen. White blood cells are going to be immune system cells to fight off bacteria and other pathogens. So it's going to be transporting those gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen. It's also going to transport hormones and other wastes. Basically just anything we need to transport throughout the body. It's probably going to be going through your cardiovascular system. The organs involved here, of course, we have the heart. The heart is mainly a pump. It's going to be pumping blood throughout the body. It's going to have four chambers. We've got the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. This right side will pump blood to the lungs in order to get oxygen. The left side will pump blood throughout the rest of the body in order to deliver that oxygen and other nutrients to the parts where it needs to go to. In addition to the heart, we've got the blood vessels. And so you see those blood vessels kind of going all throughout different parts of the body, connecting to lots of different organs. And this doesn't show all of the branches. These, where they kind of disappear, they branch out into smaller and smaller branches, basically delivering oxygen to almost every tissue in the body. So that's going to be your blood vessels. We've got arteries, which are sending blood away from the veins. Most of those are in red in the diagram, not all, but most. And then most of the veins, which are bringing blood back to the heart, most of those are in blue. Now, your blood's not actually red or blue. I feel like I say this in lots of videos. Your blood is actually always red. It can kind of change slightly in the shade of red, but we use blue for low oxygen blood to represent it on diagrams, and red for high oxygen blood. And I've got the lungs in here right as well. So you've got the pulmonary artery that's going to pump blood to the lungs, and the pulmonary veins, which bring blood back to the heart from the lungs. The lungs, of course, is where we get that oxygen from. All right, one more thing I wanted to show here. This is where the actual oxygen exchange occurs. So maybe we're going to have blood coming in through here. That's going to branch off into what we call capillaries. And so oxygen is going to leave the blood here. Also fluid and other things are going to leave through those capillaries. And then we'll get carbon dioxide coming into those capillaries so that we can get that back to the heart and then back to the lungs, and we can breathe that out. And so this is where that oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange is going to take place in these capillary beds throughout the tissues in the body. Oh, one more thing I wanted to talk about is going to be the actual blood cells themselves. So we've got the red blood cells that we see right there. Those are going to transport oxygen. The white blood cells, which are going to fight off bacteria and pathogens. We also have things called platelets, which are going to help with clotting. If we have a damaged blood vessel and we're bleeding, the platelets and the red blood cells will help to clot that up so we don't lose too much blood. And of course, those blood cells can be transported through all of our blood vessels like that. So that's the cardiovascular system: heart, blood vessels, blood. Oh, blood itself is an organ. It's a bunch of different cell types that come together to form one continuous tissue. So our blood is an organ. It's one of the organs of the cardiovascular system. And the main function there is transporting things throughout the body. Up next, we have the lymphatic and immune systems. It's kind of two different systems, but they're intertwined so much that we often group them together. And so the functions of the lymphatic system, there's going to be three. One is to reduce swelling. Without the lymphatic system, we'd have a lot of swelling in our tissues because we'd have a buildup of water in those tissues. So the lymphatic system is going to be kind of a drainage system to drain the excess water from the tissues in our body. And we can see here it kind of maps on the cardiovascular system. We'll see that in another diagram, but the lymphatic and cardiovascular system are connected to each other, sort of. It can help transport fluid back into the cardiovascular system, and it's going to do that in a couple spots right in there, where it's going to dump that fluid back into the cardiovascular system. But just think about the lymphatic system as a drainage system for the excess fluid, and therefore it can reduce the swelling. Here's a picture of that right there. So we've got that kind of capillary bed that I drew in the last system, and we've got some lymphatic capillaries that come up into it. So when that fluid leaves, a lot of that fluid will come back into the lymphatic capillaries, and that'll take that back to a couple veins to deliver that fluid and reduce the swelling. So that's the reducing swelling part. It's also going to be used in the absorption of lipids. And so whenever we eat food, we'll get to the digestive system in a minute, but whenever we eat food and we eat fatty foods, that's going to end up into our small intestine. We're going to absorb that, those fats and other nutrients, right? Like carbohydrates and proteins. But the lipids themselves, they're not soluble through membranes very well. So they actually need to go through the lymphatic membranes, which is a little bit more space to go through. And so lipids are going to be absorbed into the lymphatic system specifically. So just remember, lipids, lymphatic is where that absorption occurs. And then next, the big function, the other one we haven't talked about, which is going to be the immune response. Pathogens that get into the body, we need to fight those off. And so we use the immune system for that. So we've got a couple organs that we need to look at here. One is the lymph nodes, and the other is the lymphatic vessels, just like blood vessels. And so we've got those lymph nodes, these little green dots you can kind of see, and the vessels are the lines connecting them. And so if we zoom in on one of those lymph nodes, it looks like this. Notice we've got some blood coming in. That's how the white blood cells, which are our immune system cells, are going to get there in the first place. And we're going to have places where the lymph, which is just fluid that it's pulled out of our tissues, is going to be traveling through. And the white blood cells that stick in these lymph nodes are going to be scanning to see if there's any pathogens that we need to fight. And if there are, then we're going to fight off those bacteria and those pathogens. And we use the lymph nodes as kind of a scanning center to find those pathogens. And then that fluid is going to leave through another vessel and travel on to a new lymph node after that. So that's what our lymph nodes are and what they do. Next, we've got a few other organs. One is the spleen. The spleen acts as kind of a reservoir for blood. It's part of the immune system as well. And then we've got the thymus. The thymus is up here. That's going to develop our T cells. Why are they called T cells? The T just stands for thymus. And we also have our bone marrow. And so I've just got one long bone drawn in here, but it's really the bone marrow throughout the body. And the bone marrow is where our B cells are going to be developed. Why are they called B cells? Well, B for bone. So the B cells and T cells are a type of lymphocyte or white blood cell that's involved in our immune response. Both of those are going to start in the bone marrow, but then B cells will mature in the bone marrow, and then T cells will mature in the thymus gland. Hence they're called T cells. So both of those, the bone and the thymus, are involved in our lymphatic system as well because they're going to help develop those immune system cells. So that was the lymphatic and immune system. Obviously a lot going on there, but just think about the lymphatic system. It's a drainage system to reduce swelling, but it also does our immune response. It'll be kind of the main two things with that system. All right, that was transport those systems. Now we're going to look at absorption and secretion systems. All three of these systems are systems that are either bringing stuff into the body or they're helping stuff leave the body, or sometimes both. So that's what I mean by absorption, bringing things into the body, excretion, getting things out of the body. The first one we have here is the respiratory system. The function of the respiratory system is going to be gas exchange, and specifically, that's going to be bringing oxygen into our bloodstream. First, we bring it into our respiratory system by breathing in, but then ultimately it's got to get into our bloodstream. And then the other part of that exchange is we're going to send CO2 out of the body. So we'll pull that CO2 out of our blood into our lungs, and then we'll breathe it out so we get rid of that CO2 that we don't need. So that's the main function of this. Again, we're bringing something in, sending something out of the body here. The organs involved are going to be obviously the lungs, of course. That's going to be where that gas exchange is actually occurring. And then we've got the diaphragm below that. Now the lungs are not a muscle. You don't actually breathe with your lungs. You breathe with your diaphragm. So whenever you breathe in, you're actually contracting the diaphragm, lowering the diaphragm, which is going to use kind of a negative pressure difference to inflate the lungs and therefore pull air from outside of the body into the lungs. So I start with the diagram the diaphragm and the lungs in this video for that reason. Now let's trace the path of air going into the lungs. We'll start with the nasal cavity. It could be the oral cavity if you're breathing air through your mouth, but let's say you breathe in through your nose. That air filled with oxygen and other stuff like nitrogen is going to go into the nasal cavity. From there, it's going to travel down the throat. The back of the throat is called the pharynx right there. We've got the larynx, so pharynx then larynx. Your larynx is the vocal cords. It's actually inside of this cartilage right there. That's the thyroid cartilage. Your larynx is your voice box or your vocal cords, which are inside of that thyroid cartilage, which is there to protect your larynx. From there, the air will pass through the trachea. This is the trachea. It's got those cartilage rings which hold the trachea open so you can breathe in and out really easily. The trachea then branches off into the bronchi. You've got a right bronchus and a left bronchus, and those will branch into bronchioles. And then eventually those will branch into something called alveoli. So the alveoli, these are going to be at the end of those bronchioles. The alveoli are these little sacs right there, and these are really, really, really small. You've got lots and lots of these. And if you'll notice, there are blood vessels, actually blood vessels coming in right here, because it's going to be low oxygen blood coming in. There's going to be the gas exchange occurring right there between the blood capillaries and then the alveoli. That blood's then going to leave and go back to the heart. It's going to have high oxygen blood, so the heart can pump it out to where it needs to go now. And then, of course, whenever you breathe out, that air that was in here that did have a lot of oxygen, now it's got a lot of carbon dioxide. That'll go back and kind of retrace the path so you can breathe that carbon dioxide out. Here's a little diagram that shows that gas exchange with the alveoli. So there's the alveoli. Here's going to be the blood coming in. It's low oxygen. It's going to give off the CO2. It's going to receive some oxygen. It's going to go back to the heart. Now you've got air with high CO2 that's going to leave, and you'll breathe that air out. So that's the respiratory system. We've got all those organs we talked about there, but the big idea there is it's going to be gas exchange happening. All right, our next system with absorption and secretion is the digestive system. This is another one that's got a lot of organs, but there's really three main functions. I think it's more important right now probably to know those three main functions. And those functions are digestion of food. Now the word digest means to break down or to break apart. So digestion means to break apart. The next is absorption of nutrients. We're not just breaking the nutrients down, we also need to absorb those nutrients into the bloodstream so they can get throughout the body to our cells that need those nutrients. And finally, the last function is going to be the elimination of waste. This is when you go to the bathroom and then you excrete the fecal matter at the end of all this process. So those are going to be the three main functions that we're looking at here. Now let's take a look at all the organs that are involved. So we're first going to zoom into the mouth right here. We've got the oral cavity. We're going to be chewing food. This is mainly going to be digestion of food. We're not absorbing or eliminating anything just yet. We're going to be breaking the food down mechanically by chewing, as well as a little bit chemically because we've got our salivary glands producing saliva, which will help break down some of the food at the chemical level a little bit. We also have the esophagus. So whenever you swallow food, it's going to pass down through here, through the esophagus. Hopefully, if you're not talking while you're eating, that sort of a thing, then you won't have any issue of food going down into your trachea, where you could choke on that food or the water that might make you cough it back up. But notice that the trachea right there and the esophagus are right by each other. So whenever you swallow food, this is going to close off right there just to make sure that food goes down the esophagus. The esophagus is just a tube to take that food down into the stomach. So we have the stomach right there. The stomach is going to continue breaking down food. It's going to use things like acid. It's going to churn to keep doing some mechanical digestion. It's going to digest proteins and stuff in that stomach. From the stomach, it's going to pass into the small intestine. So I can kind of trace the path here. The esophagus down into the stomach. From the stomach, it's going down through right here. This is called the duodenum of the small intestine. This is going to be where most of the digestion is going to occur if it hasn't already. It's in the beginning of the small intestine. And the majority of the small intestine, as it's winding its way through all this long, really windy tube, is going to be absorption of the nutrients. So all the nutrients we've broken down into small little bits, we're going to be absorbing those into our bloodstream, or if it's a lipid, we'll absorb it directly into the lymphatic system. That absorption is going to occur right there. That's why we need a long small intestine, so we can absorb as much as possible into the bloodstream. From there, that food is going to pass into our large intestine, also known as the colon. So the large intestine is going to enter from the small intestine right there, travel up, over, and then down. The main thing happening in the large intestine is going to be absorption of nutrients, but specifically not the macronutrients like carbohydrates and lipids and proteins. It's going to be mainly absorbing water, and it's going to be absorbing electrolytes like the salts and stuff that are absorbed in the water. So those are going to be absorbed from the large intestine into the bloodstream. And then of course we'll excrete that out through the rectum and the anus during the elimination part of this. So those are the three main functions and the organs of the digestive tract. There's three more organs that we need to know for this. These are organs that the food does not pass through. So they're called accessory organs. One is the liver. The liver is going to produce something called bile, which is going to help break down fats. It's kind of like how soap will break down oils. It's similar to that. It's happening at that kind of chemical level. And then we've got the gallbladder, which is going to store the bile until we eat something high in fat. And then the gallbladder will release it through a little duct here into the duodenum of the small intestine. We also have the pancreas. The pancreas is this organ right here. We saw that earlier in the endocrine system because it releases the hormones to control your blood sugar, but it also produces a lot of enzymes to break down the food that we eat. And so it's going to pump those enzymes into that duodenum of the small intestine. We can see all this a little bit better in this diagram. Here we've got the liver, the gallbladder. So you've got these little tubes or ducts that connect those down to the duodenum. We can send that bile. And then we've got the pancreas with a pancreatic duct that's going to send the pancreatic enzymes into the duodenum of the small intestine. That was a lot. That was kind of an overview of the digestive system. Again, if you're learning this for the first time, the main thing right now would be able to name a lot of these organs and be able to name the three main functions of the digestive system. All right, our other system involved in absorption and secretion is the urinary system. The urinary system's main function is going to be removing waste from the blood. A lot of people maybe don't know this, but whenever you produce urine and you urinate, where did that urine come from? It actually came directly from your bloodstream. It's going to be filtering out fluid from your bloodstream. Now, why is your urine not red? Well, it doesn't have red blood cells in it, which has a particular protein called hemoglobin, which gives it the red color. So it doesn't have hemoglobin in it. So your urine is not going to have that red color unless there's something wrong and there's blood in the urine. Removal of waste from the blood. That's going to happen in the kidneys. So we have a kidney right there. And of course, if this is removing waste from the blood, we better have some blood going into it. And so we've got a couple blood vessels here, and we've got the ureters, which are going to take then the urine, which is the fluid and other waste products that have been filtered out of the blood. And then we now call it urine, but it's just the fluid and stuff that was in the blood. That's going to travel down the ureters. You've got one on either side, of course. And what this whole process of filtering this blood out, well, the purpose of it is to regulate several things. One, we're going to regulate the amount of water in our blood. That's going to help regulate our blood pressure as well. We're going to be regulating the amount of electrolytes. So we don't want our blood to have too much electrolytes. Electrolytes are just salts that are dissolved in our blood. So we don't have too much or too little of those. It's also going to regulate the pH. That's going to be the acidity of our blood. We need to keep our blood at a certain acidity for our organs and stuff to function. And so this is going to be involved in regulating our pH. Super important. We're not going to get into the details of that right now in this video. All right, we're going to zoom out a little bit. That urine that's going to travel through the ureters, that's going to go into the bladder. The bladder is just a storage tank for our urine. So that'll start to fill up with urine. And when we're ready to urinate, we're going to release a couple sphincters on the urethra right here. The urethra is just the tube that connects the bladder to the outside. And the organs here, we already talked about those, the kidneys right there, the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra. And the main function of this is to remove waste from the bloodstream. That's the big one that I would remember from this. All right, that's our last system in that category. We got one final category, which is reproduction. Of course, we've got a male and a female reproductive system to talk about. Let's start with the male reproductive system. Oh, before we get into that, actually, what are the functions of this? The functions are, one, to produce and transport gametes. Gametes are going to be the sex cells, the sperm cells and the male reproductive, and egg cells in the female reproductive. So it's going to be producing those. And then the other function here is going to be to nurture a developing fetus. And that's going to happen specifically, of course, in the female reproductive system in the uterus right here. Now, I didn't mention on here production of hormones, but of course these are producing hormones in the testes and the ovaries. I just added that to the endocrine system, but that's also of course involved in the reproductive system as well. Now let's take a look at the male reproductive system. So here are the organs that we have. We've got the testes. This is the primary reproductive organ because that's where the sperm is produced, as well as testosterone. The sperm are going to travel up through this called the epididymis and through this tube called the vas deferens. We've got a couple organs here, the seminal vesicle, the prostate, which I'll label on here, and then we've got one called the bulbourethral gland. All of those are going to be producing the fluid or the semen that's going to mix with the sperm that have traveled up through the vas deferens. And then of course that's going to travel through the penis right here. Urine and semen both travel through the shaft of the penis right there to the outside of the body. And of course, you know, the testes right there, I said those are the main kind of reproductive organ because they're producing the sperm. Everything else is really just there in order to transmit that sperm outside of the body to do fertilization and all that kind of stuff. Now, the next thing is going to be the female reproductive system. The main organ here, the primary sex organ of the female reproductive system is the ovary. And the ovary, we can zoom in on it here and we can kind of see the process of the ovarian cycle, which we're not going to get into the details of that in this video. But we've got an egg cell right there that's going to develop into a follicle, and then during ovulation, that egg cell is going to get released and it's going to get grabbed up by this oviduct, also known as the fallopian tube. So here we have the oviduct. It's going to suck that into the oviduct, and that cell is going to then travel through, and if there's a sperm cell present, of course, that's going to get fertilized in that oviduct. and then travel to this organ right there, which is the uterus. The uterus is going to be the site of implantation and the growth of a fetus if a pregnancy occurs. So that's the uterus right there. Of course, during menstruation, if there's not fertilization, then when menstruation happens, that's the lining of the uterus that is leaving the body. And then finally down here, we have the vagina or the vaginal canal. And so those are going to be the main organs of the female reproductive system. So we've got the female and the male reproductive system. And of course, the main function of those systems is to produce and transport the sperm and egg cells. And then in the female reproductive system, to be able to nurture and develop a fetus and give birth to that fetus and have a new human. All right, so that was a lot of information. We went through all 11 organ systems and we talked about them in terms of these 5 categories. A ton of information. At this point, if you're learning it for the first time especially, you need to do something to practice doing some active recall and reasoning with this information to help you store it in your brain long term. So don't forget to go download my free study guide for this topic. Link in the description for that. It'll give you some active recall exercises, some practice questions, things to do to strengthen your understanding, your memory of this stuff. And if you really want to level up your understanding of anatomy and physiology, your ability to learn while also gaining access to all the resources that I'm creating, don't forget to check out the A&P Memory Lab. You can join the waitlist for that in the description below. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. Here's another video that the algorithm thinks that you might like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.